session is on how to teach inquiry remotely. And right now you probably are thinking this might be a little challenging, and you're not wrong, right? Because we are used to doing inquiry. We've been doing inquiry since step one, but we've always been kind of doing it in person. So when we think of inquiry, we think of walking around the room, using manipulatives, doing hands-on, being right there with our students. And now we kind of don't exactly have that environment. So the question is, can we even teach inquiry online? Is this even a thing? Is this a possibility? And hopefully by the end of today's session, you will all have a resounding yes, we can. All right, so first thing we're going to do is sort of an agenda for the next 2 hours. I think that's how much time I have, is that we're going to be covering sort of 4 basic strategies: visuals, manipulatives, demos, and simulations. And these are all things that are going to work really well in your online environment, but they're also going to work really well in a face-to-face environment. So I know somebody earlier asked, well, are we potentially going to go back to the schools? You might be doing some hybrid teaching at some point in your teaching experience. And then after this, eventually the pandemic will end. So you will be back in a school, ideally full time. And so the strategies we're going to go over today are going to be good for either type of teaching. So it's not like it's just for online or just for in person. You can use them for both. So let's start off with the visuals. Okay, so anyone who's worked with me before knows I am a big proponent of visuals. Visuals, visuals, visuals. I think they're so important. I wrote it 3 times with exclamation points because, as I like to say, you live and die by your visuals. If you have good visuals, your lesson is going to go a lot smoother. Students can figure out just about anything from those visuals. If you have poor visuals, then it's going to make teaching a lot harder. My apologies. I'm trying to find lighting so I don't constantly get backlit. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is we're going to talk about different ways to use visuals utilizing the resources available to you. So most of you are going to be using one of 2 platforms to teach. If you're in the Weslaco School District, most likely you'll be using Zoom. Zoom is what they used in the fall, so I'm assuming they would use the same platform in the spring. If you are in the other school districts, you will probably be using the Google Meet and Google Classroom platform, sort of the Google Suite. And so I am going to show you some hacks that you can use with Google, because Google doesn't have exactly all the functionality of Zoom. So at this point, most of you are probably fairly proficient with Zoom. You've probably used it for at least one of your classes prior to student teaching. Maybe you were in CI and you used it to teach then. Maybe you were in PBI and used it to teach then. But most of you probably haven't taught yet with Google Meets. And so I'm going to show you a few tricks of the trade that you can do to do the same sort of features that you would with Zoom. All right, so here's a visual that we have. This comes from the Sink and Float lesson. So raise your hand if you've done the Sink and Float lesson before, maybe in step 1. Anybody? Okay, I'm seeing some hands up there. All right, so in the Sink and Float lesson, it's a fun little lesson that we do with the kids where we give them a bunch of objects. They stick it in some water. Some of the objects sink, some of the objects float, and they have to figure out why. Now, this is not the kind of lesson that you can really be doing right now. You can't be handing them a bunch of objects and telling them to put them in water. You can't be handing them manipulative cards. This would be examples of manipulative cards that we used to figure out which ones sank and which ones floated and answer that question. So what we're going to do here is Mr. Sears created the results map. So the results map basically shows you which objects float and which objects sank. And I could annotate this with the Zoom annotate feature, but I also made this into a PowerPoint. So I can also just use the PowerPoint and I can circle all the objects that float, my beautiful circling there. And I can also circle all of the objects that sank. There we go. Now, I'm using the PowerPoint function right now, but I could also exit out of the PowerPoint main screen, which I'm going to do right now. It's asking me if I want to keep my ink annotations, so you can keep or disregard those. Another cool thing about PowerPoint, especially if you have the newest version, is they now have this draw feature. And so in this draw feature, it pretty much gives me all the same functionality as the annotate feature on Zoom. So I now have my pens and I have my highlighters and all of those extra things. So now I can do the same thing using the draw feature. So if you're using Google Meets, you can annotate if you get an extension, but I would be very wary about the extensions because some of the extensions only work if all of your students have the same extension. Otherwise, they're not exactly functional. So here's one of those little hacks that I was telling you about. If you're using Google Meets, use the annotate features on the actual PowerPoint instead of using, say, like the Zoom annotate. So here we go. I circled in purple all the objects that floated, and I circled in blue all the objects that sank. Okay, so now what I want you to do is, using this visual, please go to the chat, and I would like you to type into the chat, what do all the objects that float have in common, and what do all the objects that sink have in common? I'm going to type that question into the chat in case you forgot. So what do all the objects that float have in common? And what do all the objects that sink have in common? And please type your answer into the chat. Okay, so I'm starting to get some answers. So let's see. All right, I'm having some people saying words like matter, particles, space, circles, far apart, close together, packed, separated. Okay, so I'm seeing some interesting ideas here. So now I'm going to call on a few people to sort of expand on their thinking. So Porfirio, can you please unmute your microphone and tell us, what did you notice about all the objects that floated? Just tell me about the objects that floated.
Okay, I put that the particles or the matters are separated more than in comparison to the ones that sink.
Okay, and when you say matter, what are you referring to? What is the matter?
Well, the triangle that I'm talking about, the actual dots inside the triangle.
Okay, so is it the triangle or is it the dots in the triangle?
And the dots inside the triangle.
Okay, so you're saying these little dots inside the triangle, they're more separated in the ones that float, and they're more together in the ones that sink. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, and now I'm going to ask another question to another student. So everybody think about the answer to this one. Do the number of dots matter? Does the amount of matter matter? According to the picture, just looking at the picture, does the amount of matter matter? Does the number of dots matter? Everyone think about it. Think, think, think. And I'm going to call on someone for the answer. Okay, I'm going to give this one to Dulce. Dulce, what do you think? Does the amount of matter matter?
Based on the picture, it does not, because they all just have 3 dots.
They all have 3 dots. So if it's not the number of dots, what is it that really is important here?
It's the space between the dots.
The space between the dots. Thank you, Dulce. Okay, so we're going to pause right there. And so I want us to take a step back and think about the different strategies that I used. So the first question I have for you is, who explained how matter works, why things sink, why things float? Who explained that in this situation? Anybody can answer that question. Okay. The students, right? So that's the whole point of the inquiry-based lesson, is allowing the students to come to these conclusions, and then we as teachers provide the support to get them there. So now what I want you to think about is, what were all the techniques that I utilized to get the students to come to that conclusion? about why things sink and why things float. So type into the chat, what were some of the strategies I used to get to the students to come up with those answers? Okay, so answers are coming into the chat. So here are some things that we have. We have wait time. So I asked the students, okay, don't answer yet. Think about it. Then I'm going to call on somebody. So I use that wait time. Multiple questions. Dionisio, can you elaborate a little bit more? What do you mean by multiple questions?
So you basically provided the students with guidance through questions on what you wanted them to basically focus on. And that's how they came up with the answer.
Okay, so I didn't ask just one question. I asked one question, then a follow-up, and then a follow-up to sort of guide the students and clarify those ideas. Jonathan mentions the visuals, right? We were using the visuals. We had this results map that had very specific pictures showing things that I wanted the students to look at. Getting a lot more questions, open-ended questions. So kind of getting, okay, what do they all have in common? What do you think the reason is? So kind of asking those. And let's see. Oh, okay. So I have this comment about letting them use informal language. Eleazar, can you elaborate a little bit more on that and why that might be important?
Basically, since we're barely understanding the concept of, or some students might not understand the concept of matter or the particles, and you kind of use the circles to, what do you call that? Like represent what it means, the particles. Like, so you let them use circles instead of particles or instead of matter.
Okay,
But
so yeah.
you're still like, they're still grasping that concept.
Okay, so yeah, we're starting sort of with the just what do you notice? And we let students use any term they liked. Circles, particles, matter. Sometimes students will use molecules. Maybe they know about molecules. That's cool. Maybe they don't. That's okay too. We're sort of gauging the students at where they're at. They can use sort of any sort of vocabulary that they're comfortable with, and then we layer on the academic vocabulary later. So first they said things like, okay, wait, what is matter? Help me out with that matter idea. And then he explained, oh, matter are the circles. So if any student wasn't familiar with that idea, they could all figure out the circles. And then we added that layer of, okay, let's give the circles an official name. Let's talk about matter. And a little bit later, what other academic term might I introduce? We talked about how they're close together. We talked about how they're far apart. Mario, what other academic term might I start using after we talk about those concepts?
Oh, I was thinking about density.
Nice, yes. But I didn't start with density. Why didn't I start with density?
Because you basically be giving away the answer.
Okay, I'd be giving away the answer. Does anyone have another idea of why I might not want to start with the word density or the word matter or the word molecule?
You want them to make the connections. The students make the connections. They first respond, like Eleazar said, with informal language, and then you'll introduce density. Oh, exactly what you said. That's, you can connect.
Absolutely, right? We're letting them think about the ideas in a way that makes sense to them, and then we're saying, oh, by that way, the thing you're thinking about, it's called density. And so we're letting them have a place for that word. Instead of saying, here's the word, now let's figure out what it means. We're saying, here's what's happening. By the way, let me give you a word so we can all talk about it together in the same language. So absolutely, great ideas that we have here. We talked about how we used questioning, wait time, building on those questions, using the annotate feature, using the visuals. But there's also one other technique that I use that like nobody's mentioning. Use the chat. Use the chat. What's the technique? Another technique that I use to get the students to participate that like nobody has talked about yet. Use the chat. Oh yes, there it is, the chat. Yes, that was supposed to give it away. Yes, so we use the chat. All right, now whether you are using Zoom or Google Meets, both have a chat feature. So you can use a chat in either case. So now what I want you to think about is I had you use the chat and I had you respond verbally. So let's kind of break it down a little bit of when would we want to use the chat and when we would want to use the verbal responses. And why would we want to use both? Why wouldn't we just want to use one? So it's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with the chat. So everybody type into the chat box, when or why would you want to use the chat feature? What's the benefit of the chat feature? Type into the chat box, what is the benefit of using the chat? Okay, so I'm seeing some good responses. We want everyone to answer. You don't want everyone talking over at the same time. Independent thinking, participate. Okay, great. I'm going to call on somebody now to expand on their thinking. So let's give this one to Brenda Santana. Brenda, can you unmute your mic? Why would I want to use the chat? What's the benefit of the chat?
Using the chat when like everybody is gonna answer, like for example, like open questions, like for example, like this, like all of us have a different opinion on it, so we can use the chat and then you can read from there and have us explain once you call on us.
Excellent. So Brenda's saying like the chat is sort of this democratic thing. Everybody gets a chance to answer. I want you to think about the reverse. What if I don't use the chat? What happens if I don't use the chat? If I just ask a question to the whole class? What's the benefit of the chat? And I don't say type it into the chat. So what might happen in that situation? Alma, can you unmute your microphone and tell us what you mean by miss out on good answers? What's going on there?
Well, like a lot of times shy students won't want to answer out loud because they get nervous and they're camera shy and all that. So, and they might have a good answer for what you asked. So if you let them do it in the chat, then you get everybody's response and you get to see what they wouldn't have displayed out loud.
Absolutely. So just like in your normal classrooms when you're face-to-face, if you ask a question to the entire class, who's going to probably answer that question? Think about that. Who's going to probably answer that question if you ask a question to the entire class?
One
Raymond?
that always answers.
I'm sorry?
It's usually the student that always answers.
It's that kid, right? It's that kid. It's no different on Zoom. So if you ask a question to the class, who's going to answer? That kid. You know, it's going to always be the same student or students. Or you get the opposite, which I think Lizbeth wrote, like nobody answers. Like it's either nobody or it's always the same kids. Same thing's going to happen here. So by starting with the chat, you kind of give everybody a chance to answer first. Now, notice I never end with the chat though. I could just say, everyone type it into the chat. Great responses, everyone. Let me just read them. Okay, let's move on. So why don't I just stop with the chat? Why do I always call on people after the chat?
So that they can justify their answers?
They can justify their answers. Good. Keep going, Jonathan. Why might that be important? Why might I? Because I can read their answer. Why might I need them to talk a little bit more about their answer?
Just so that you can see that they have like a deeper understanding if they're able to connect it to like multiple other things, not just the topic that's pertaining to like them, I guess. Like so that they can see the bigger picture and really engages like that higher order thinking that we're trying to do.
Exactly. So the chat, I want you to notice about like the level of answers for the chat. So think about, where is the chat good? Is the chat good for, and this one, type into the chat, tell me what you think. Is the chat going to be the best for, would you say, level 1 questions, level 2 questions, or level 3 questions? Type it into the chat. Tell me what you think. So I'm mostly seeing like level 1, level 2. So let's give this one to somebody to tell us about. I'm going to give this one to Erica. Erica, why do you think the chat is better for those level 1, level 2 questions?
Because they're like more simple questions for the student.
And why would that be better suited for the chat? Why do you want to give your easy questions to the chat?
To hear from different students, or like so they can answer, like everyone gets to answer those.
Okay, so if it's a simple question, probably everyone could come up with an answer. So that's one thing. So we want everybody to answer. So we give a question that everybody can answer. Let's expand on that idea too. Eric, why would you want to give your simple questions to the chat and your harder questions for the verbal responses?
Well, because it's gonna take less time for the students to to get the answers on the chat?
Absolutely, right? I mean, if you're asking a really complex question, you might be spending like 5 minutes while they're thinking about how to type out this basically essay response. So the chat it's great for simple, easy, quick answers. Not so great for complicated, deep, philosophical thought. So that's why you really want to toggle between the two. Yeah, you can use just chat, you can use just verbal, but it's really great to use both. Give them the chat first, let them think about it, everyone gets a chance, everyone gets their brain going, and then dig a little deeper, have them move into those responses a little bit more, go into that higher level thinking with the verbal responses afterwards. So kind of using a combination of both usually is your best. Now again, this doesn't work in every situation is a little bit different, but usually that combination is a pretty good one for getting the most out of your class participation and the most out of your questioning techniques. So now that being said, there's a little extra thing about the chat that we're going to talk about in just a second that can make it go even better, okay? So now that we've looked at this one right here, I'm going to give you another visual example. So this is a visual that Mr. Sears created. You are welcome to create your own visuals, but you also don't have to, because you have this thing called Google. And Google will create a lot of visuals for you. That's what it's really good at. It even has that image search. So especially when you're teaching online, do not feel like you have to create everything. Use the internet to your benefit. Pull up images. The big thing is to remember to cite your sources, to be appropriate and say where the sources came from. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go back into my full screen mode. There we go. And here, this is going to be an example where we're actually going to have two images. And you're going to see why in just a second, why you're going to really need those two images. So I have this lesson on DNA, and I have the question right here. Which bases bond together and why? And I want the students to answer both of these questions. They really can't answer them with one image, and you'll see why in just a second. So to answer this question, I'm going to actually break it down. I'm going to cover up the image on the right, so pretend it doesn't exist. And I'm only going to ask you the first part of that question. Which bases bond together? So into the chat, just like we talked about before, start with the chat, give everyone a chance to sort of think about it. I want you to type in which bases bond together. Let me put the question into the chat in case you forgot. Some of you are already there. You're like, I got this, Ms. Goldberg. I got this. Which bases bond together? Good practice would be always typing your questions into the chat in case they forget what you asked. So that way they can refer back to it. Which bases bond together? Okay, I'm getting a lot of good answers. So some people are just using the letters, A, T, C, G. Some people are actually writing out the names. The key is right here. Adenine with thymine and cytosine with guanine. Okay, very nice. I think we're all in agreement there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call on somebody to answer a little bit of a follow-up question. So the question was, which bases bond together? And I think everyone was able to identify that correctly. So now what I'm going to ask is, are there any exceptions? Are there any times where adenine bonds to cytosine? And according to this image, again, because remember, we have to use these images to help us out. Are there any times where adenine bonds to cytosine? So look at the image, and I'm going to call on somebody for that answer. Okay, Vanessa Cantu, what do you think? Are there any exceptions where an adenine bonds to a cytosine or an adenine bonds to a guanine?
No.
Why not? What can you say about the picture that would show that this is not happening, that this is not the case?
Because the red and the green are always together.
Red and green are always together. And who else is always together?
The yellow and the blue.
The yellow and the blue. So now we have to answer that why question. Why? So again, only using this picture, nothing else. Look at this picture and let's see if anyone can see if they can figure out a why. Only using this picture. Does anyone think they can see a why? Why is adenine always with thymine? Why is the cytosine always with guanine?
Do you want us to answer on the chat or verbally?
This one I'll actually let you do verbally. So Mary, why don't you give us a chance since you're already unmuted? Do you see a Y there?
The shape of the bond.
Bond.
The
what
shape
bond?
of the.
I don't have an answer.
Oops. The shape.
The length.
Like the where they connect.
The shape where they connect. So what can you say about the shape here? What do you notice about it?
That has like a point.
Okay.
And the other one's more circular.
It's more circular. But that could just be an artistic rendition, right? Like that could just be the way that the artist drew it. Like we don't know, is that actually a thing? Like does DNA actually look pointy with adenine and thymine? And does it actually look circular with cytosine and guanine? Is that like actually a thing? So this is where one picture is really not going to be enough to answer that question. So one thing that I see people do all the time is they're like, I have one picture. They should be able to answer all the questions. And it's like, not exactly. So don't be afraid to throw another picture in there. So this is where that second picture is going to come into play. So now what I want you to do is I want you to answer the Y. This second picture has the Y, but don't do it yet. Do not answer it yet. I know you want to, itchy fingers. Don't answer it yet because I have a special instruction for you. So what I need you to do is I need you to, sorry, I'm trying to get rid of the little pointer. There we go. I think I'm good. Yes. I want you to go to the chat box and I want you to private chat me. So private chat Elizabeth Goldberg, set it only to Elizabeth Goldberg so only I can see it. And I want you using the second image to answer the why. Why does adenine only bond to thymine? Why does cytosine only bond to guanine? Why do we never see an exception to this rule? So using the private chat, not the public chat, the private chat, just set it to Elizabeth Goldberg, answer that question. And I'll type in the question for everyone. Why does adenine only bond to thymine? Why does cytosine only bond to guanine? There we go. Okay, starting to get one answer. Wait for a few more. So you can't see these answers. I can't because they're private chatting. Okay, does anyone need a hint? Does anyone be like, oh, I don't know, Miss Goldberg? If you need a hint, I'm seeing some head nods. The hint is in the middle. Look in the middle. That's your hint. The answer is there. It's in the middle. Why does adenine only bond to thymine? Why does cytosine only bond to guanine? The hint is in the middle. You can figure it out. I'll give you a couple seconds more. Well, my math majors were like, nobody told me I had to learn biology in today's training. All right, I'm going to call on somebody I haven't called on yet. Let's see if they can help us figure this out. Jennifer Gonzalez, help me out here. Like, what might be going on? What might be happening that would explain why adenine only bonds to thymine and cytosine only bonds to guanine?
Well, I see they're kind of the same, but the opposite. So maybe if they bonded together, could they cancel each other?
Okay, what kind of looks the same? What kind of looks opposite? Can you elaborate a little bit more there?
Yeah. The green is similar to the orange on the ends.
On the ends? So help me out with which end?
On the end and the end.
Oh, okay. So we're looking right here with like these ends.
Yes.
Okay. And so you're saying the green and it also looks like which one?
The NH on the pink one is similar to the HN on the purple one, but it's like backwards.
Okay, so we're kind of looking like here in this area. Is that correct? Am I understanding you correctly?
No.
Okay, so that's okay because like right now I'm not understanding her correctly. So if you are working with Zoom, you can actually have the student annotate. And if you're working with Google Meets, I'll show you a alternative in just a second where they could do this. So Jennifer, why don't you pull out the annotate feature and show me where you're looking.
Where do I get it?
So probably if you're in full screen mode, it will probably be at the top of your screen. It'll either be a pencil or there'll be 3 dots that say more. If you click on that, it'll give you a drop-down menu, and one of those options will be annotate.
I can't find it.
At the top where it says you are viewing Elizabeth Goldberg's screen, do you see an thing that says view options?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Click view
Oh,
options
okay.
and then.
Yeah, sometimes when you're host, it's a little different. Yeah, so we'll say view options instead of more. And then if you click that, it should give you an option for annotate.
So I was meaning this is like the opposite of the purple one. And
oh, okay. I
it's
see.
on the other side of the N.
Okay, so we're seeing these like N's and these H's, and there's something in between them. What might be this thing in between them? This dotted line. What are these things? Let's see. Let's go with Roxy. Roxy, what might these dotted lines be? Whoa, what just happened? Sorry. It went back a screen. Okay. Give me a second. Just gonna move that over there. There we go. Okay, Roxy, what might those lines be, those dotted lines?
Honestly, I have no idea. I was just going off of what the picture is saying, so I was thinking like backbones. If they were
okay.
Them.
Maybe it's a backbone. Maybe it's something to connect them. I like that idea of connecting them, right? It does look sort of like they're connecting them. Absolutely. There is some sort of connection here. Okay, go back to the first picture. Go back to the first picture, everyone. What might be the thing that's connecting them? What might be the thing that's connecting them? What might these little dots represent?
Hydrogen bonds.
Hydrogen bonds, right? So these are the hydrogen bonds. So I want everyone to look at those hydrogen bonds. That's your hint. That's your hint to the answer right there. So I want you to look at the adenine and thymine, and I want you to look at the cytosine and guanine and see if you can figure it out now. The hint has to do with those hydrogen bonds. We've noticed how Jennifer was mentioning there does seem to be some similarities in some of the hydrogen bonds, like the one in the middle always seems to be the same. It's always that same hydrogen bond, but there is something different that is giving us the answer here.
Because adenine and thymine has 2, and the guanine and cytosine have 3.
Always?
That's what it looks like.
So why can't an adenine bond to a cytosine?
Not the same number?
Not the same number. What would happen to one of those hydrogen bonds?
It would blow up.
It would just kind of be dangling, right? And like have nothing to bond to. That's no fun. All right, so yes, so the answer is the number of hydrogen bonds. So here with the adenine and thymine, we always have 2. Cytosine and guanine always have 3, and that is why an adenine will never bond to a cytosine or a guanine, and a thymine will never bond to a cytosine or guanine, and vice versa. Okay, so lot to unpack there. Let's talk about a few things that were going on here. So the first thing is, this is an example to show you why we needed 2 images. So let's talk about that. Why did we need 2 images? Why did we need 2 images? I'm going to give this one to Lizbeth. Lizbeth, why did we need 2 images in this case?
Because the first image does not show those hydrogen bonds, like it only shows the shape. And if you just show that first image, the students are going to think that that's what it actually looks like, that it's just those, shapes that you mentioned. But when you give the second image, the students see that, oh, okay, it's not just shapes, there's actually hydrogen bonds between these molecules.
Okay, so the first image doesn't give enough information. The second image gives that extra information about the hydrogen bonds. But now I got an alternative question for you. Then why not just start with the second image? I could just start with the second image. So you're a freshman biology student learning about this DNA for the first time. So Roxy, I'm going to give this one to you. What would happen if I showed you this image first? What would you think if this was the very first image you saw in your high school biology class?
That's how they all look like.
That's how they all look like. And what else might be going through your head if you're a brand new biology student and you're seeing this image as the first image of DNA?
I wouldn't know that that's the way it's supposed to be formed or how it's supposed to be represented.
Yeah, and I'm liking what Denisio and Mario are writing into the chat. Denisio, you wrote scary. Why did you write scary? What is scary about this second image?
There's so many shapes and letters and stuff that obviously a freshman is not gonna be able to decipher or understand, so it might be very overwhelming for them.
Absolutely. And I think Jesus wrote, like, I might skip class. I might be like, I'm out, bounce, I'm done. This is too much. So this is going to be my warning with you, is that really be very mindful of how you select your images. Just like we talked about with the chat versus open discussion, start with those easies, build your way up. Same thing with your images. Start with a nice, easy peasy image. This is easy. This isn't intimidating. Red goes with green, blue goes with yellow. We can do that, right? And then we build into this idea of, okay, what's going on with the bonds and those sort of things. So don't start with the super scary, crazy image, but don't end with the super easy image. Make sure that you have a nice mix of both and you're sort of building the students up as you go. It kills me when teachers who teach biology say adenine bonds to thymine, cytosine bonds to guanine, because I'm like, they could figure that out. They totally could. It's right there. It's in the picture. But it's really about picking the right pictures to help them get to those ideas. Now, we're going to shift gears a little bit because I also used another strategy there, the private chat. So I would like you to private chat me, since we're practicing that idea, why the private chat might be helpful. What is the benefit of using the private chat instead of the public chat? But you're not going to do it here. Hold your horses. You're not going to do it here because here's the thing. Private chat is only an option if you are using Zoom. So my Zoom people, my ones who are going to be in Weslaco, you're good. You got the private chat, you're done. If you're on my Google Meets, everybody else, you don't. So we have to come up with some alternative ways to private chat. So here are some of your hacks. So one of them is poll everywhere. You could come up with poll everywhere and have all the students respond through a poll everywhere poll, and you could see who's responding and what they're saying. I've used it before. It's okay. It's a little clunky. One of them is Nearpod. So Ms. Gonzalez just showed you Nearpod. They could put anonymous responses, or you could see all their responses and just choose not to publish them. And so that could give you an option if you're using a Nearpod to again have that private chat feature. But the one we're going to try out today is the Google Classroom. So remember that Google Classroom I asked you to have? We are going to use it. So what I would like you all to do right now, I'm going to switch over to that, is go to your Google Classroom, the link that I sent you. Where is it? There we go. Awesome. Okay, and so in your Google Classroom, let me get out of this. That was just to share the code. Okay, so many of you will be using a Google Classroom. If you have not completed your Google certification, please do so. Google is the platform that most teachers are using, so you want to be pretty proficient with it. So if we go under classwork, here are all the assignments that I have assigned for your training. And they're pretty easy to create. There's an create button and, you know, there's different things you can do. I'm not going to go through all of that with you today. You can do that trainings with your teacher and on your own. But what I do want you to do is I want you to click on the assignment that says private chat. Private chat. And so when you go into private chat, right now it just says private chat, but you could ask a specific question. So you could say, you know, in this case, my question for you is, what is the value of using the private chat? But you could also say things like, why does adenine only bond to thymine? Or why does cytosine only bond to guanine? Up to you. So what you're going to do right now is it's going to give me a list of everybody who is in the class, who is participating, and it's going to give me their answers in just a second. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I don't want you to see them at the moment. It is a private chat. And I'm going to type the instructions. So what I want you to do is into the private chat on Google Classroom, we're going to use Google Classroom, please type what is the benefit of using private chat versus, say, the public chat. So what is the benefit of using private chat? So please type your answers into the Google Classroom. I think it gives you 3 options. You're going to want the one that's something like submit answer. Okay, so starting to get some answers into the Google Classroom.
Ms. Goldberg,
Yes.
is it under private comments?
Right, so there are 3 options, I think. There's private comments. What are the 3 options?
Class comments and your answer.
Your answer. You want your answer. That's the one I want. So if you put it to one of the others, you could just resubmit it.
Private comments are also for you, Ms. Goldberg, right?
Right, yeah, so you could use them for either. The reason why I want you to use your answers, I'm just going to show you what it looks like on my end.
So I could ask you or a private comment before submitting my answer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of ways you could use this private chat. You know, you could just have it going all the time in the background. And one of the comments that Mr. Sears made for last semester students, which I think is an awesome comment, and I'm going to repeat it, is this is one of the ways you could help your teacher. So remember how they talked about at the beginning, especially before you actually start teaching your own lessons, you're going to be assisting the teacher. Monitoring the chat can be a great way to do that. You can be monitoring the chat and assisting the teacher in that way. You could be having the students private chat and monitoring the private chat and seeing what they're responding. You can also save the chat. So that's another thing you can do is you can set the Zoom features to save the chat so you can have a record of all the things that the students responded. And for the Google Classroom, do you guys want to see what it looks like? Ready? Okay, let's go check it out. Okay, so for the Google Classroom, again, I have this record of who responded, what their response was, and I also have this record of who didn't respond. So I can be like, oh, Valeria, I don't see your response. Make sure you type something in there. And so that way I can keep this. So you can have one per question, or you could have one per lesson. So maybe you have one that's just called DNA lesson, and they respond in the DNA lesson to all their questions, and you have all their questions or their answers in there. Or you could just have one, like we said, just labeled private chat. And anytime you want them to use the private chat, you could do that. And you could be monitoring this for the teacher and sort of helping them out in that case. Or you could have a record of it later. So like for an exit ticket kind of thing. Okay, these are the things they got, and these are the things they're still a little bit fuzzy about. So everyone can see those are coming in. So if you are not using Zoom, but you still want to give them the benefit of a private chat, you absolutely can using one of these other resources. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. I'm just trying to use, tools that you're already going to be using. So that way it makes it a little bit easier on you. So if you're already using Nearpod, you can use the Nearpod to private chat. If you're already going to be using Google Classroom, you can use Google Classroom and have them private chat that way. So let's go through some of these answers. So Vanessa Cantu, can you talk to us a little bit about your answer? What would be some of the benefits of the private chat?
Well, I would think more students would answer because, like, obviously, like, if it were like everyone can see, obviously you'd be seeing what other students are putting, and it's like, oh, like, I'm wrong, versus it being individual, and then, like, it doesn't really matter. And then, of course, students copying other students. I feel like everyone does that. Like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a good answer. Let me just reword it. So,
yeah, if I wait long enough that I could be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna put that answer.
Yeah.
Oops, I thought it was C to T. Okay, let me rewrite that. So yeah, it kind of cuts down on that. Oh, everybody put this answer, so I'm gonna put this answer too. Mm-hmm. It definitely helps with those students who are a little bit shy, the students who are a little bit iffy, the students who are a little bit insecure. They may not want to post their answer for the entire world to see. Just like those students are going to be really nervous to give an incorrect answer in front of the class, they're going to be really nervous to give an incorrect answer in front of the chat. That is there forever. So yeah, you might have missed it if they said something, but you can always go back to the chat, and there it is. there's that wrong answer for everyone to see. So the private chat can eliminate some of that fear factor. So if you have some students who are just afraid to type in a wrong answer, it can help with them as well. It can also help with students. So let's think of specific groups of students who the private chat might also help with. What about my slow typers? Why is the private chat going to be really great for my slow typers?
Because the lesson might move on, and they were still responding to the question, and they're gonna erase it.
Yeah, exactly. You're already on the next question, and they're like, "Wait, I'm still working on the first one." So again, that private chat gives them the chance to finish that question. What about my bad spellers? What about my bad spellers? That would be me. I'm the bad speller. All right, Dulce, why is the private chat going to be helpful for my bad spellers?
The same reason they won't be like embarrassed in front of their peers, and they'll be able to be more expressive even though they do have still those mistakes. They won't be taught or made fun of.
Exactly, yeah.
Because
so
at the end of the day, they're still kids.
Exactly. And they might, one of the reasons why your students may not be responding in the chat is they might just be worried that they're going to spell something wrong. They know the answer, but they might just be worried about misspelling some of those terms. So again, removing those barriers. Now here's another group. Everybody think about this one. This is an important group. What if you're a student who is still learning English? What if you're a student who's still learning English? So let's all think about that for a second. Okay, so Samantha, how is the private chat going to help that student?
I mean, it's going to help them because they'll be able to write it in the language they're more fluent with, and you'll be able to understand it. And maybe other kids would be like, well, what is this person talking about? You know, they might not understand what their classmate is saying, but you'll be able to understand that person.
Excellent, Samantha. Excellent point. So just like all the other things we talked about, it gives them more time. They don't have to worry about their spelling. They can also answer in their native language. And that's really powerful too. Jesus, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, to what Samantha just said, it also gives us time as the teachers to maybe, if we don't know their native language, we can use Google Translate, right? And then that way we can feel, oh, you get me, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And use those resources, use those tools. And again, we're kind of into the second semester, so your students, your teachers should have a fairly good notion of where they are and can help you out with that. But a lot of teachers might be doing Duolingo in their classroom assignments, not so much per se for the students, but also for the people at home who are helping the students. Because if you think about it, now more than ever, we've got parents who are at home assisting with homework, assisting with classwork in a way much more than we were when we were in person. And so I know my daughter's homework assignments are all bilingual, not so much for her, but for the parents who have to go and help the student do all of these assignments. So absolutely, using those tools, let them use the translator. You use the translator. Let them, use both languages when you're creating these assignments, not just for the students, but for whoever's helping them with these assignments. Absolutely, those can be great resources. And again, that private chat gives them that safe space where they can use the resources and the tools they need without fear of what their peers are going to think about them. Yes, Jesus, did you have another question?
Yes, I remember that Miss Elise, I think it was Miss Elise that said that, or Mr. Elizondo, that we should be able to know how to kick out students. But what would happen if, let's say, a vulgar or inappropriate message sent in the chat? How could we control that?
So with the private chat, that's easy, right? Because that's only going to you. With the public chat, I don't know if you can remove messages. You can copy messages, but I don't believe you can remove them. So that is something that I would have to look into. And again, Google Meets and Zoom is probably going to be different, but I think that that is not an option. So, you know, setting class rules, setting groundwork on what is and what is not acceptable. You can disable the chat if it's becoming too much of an issue. You can have, for Zoom at least, you can set the settings that they can only chat with you so that there is no public chat. So that is an option as well.
Thank you. And yeah, well, maybe we would have never guessed all this happening, right? And Zoom or Google Classroom would have to incorporate now. I mean, if it's becoming a nationwide or world problem.
Right. And again, for most of you, for the vast majority of you, that's not going to be an issue. But like Mr. Alessandro said, it is good to know these things if they come up so you're not caught off guard. Mario, were you going to add something there? I thought you unmuted for a second.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, what about for kicking people out? Because I think I signed in twice.
Right. So you have the option, at least with Zoom, and again, I'm not as proficient with Google Meets, but with Zoom you can remove people. You can also report individuals, and so you can put them in a waiting room. That's another option where you don't have to necessarily kick them out, but you can put them in a waiting room and then, you know, deal with that situation later. So there are other features that you can do. So, and also these are the kind of things you would want to talk to the cooperating teacher about. In the event that blah, blah, blah happens, which one would you like me to do in that situation? And so that would be a conversation that I would have with them about what is sort of their classroom policies and how would they want certain situations handled if they were to come up.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so we talked about chat. We talked about private chat. Let's see. Okay, yes, so getting back to some of those hacks that we were discussing before. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit again about Annotate, and then I'm going to share with you a little hack for the Annotate for my Google Meet people. Okay, so going with our visuals, here is a math example where maybe I'm teaching a lesson on linear equations or I'm teaching a lesson on slope. So instead of telling the students which line is which, I'm actually going to let them tell me. So I have 3 lines. I have a red line, a blue line, and a green line. If your students are colorblind, you should probably number these. You should probably number these anyways, probably a good idea. So here's line number 1, here's line number 2, here's line number 3. Okay, and then here are 3 options. Y equals 4x, y equals 2x, and y equals x. So your job is to identify which line is which. But here's the thing. I'm not going to have you verbally tell me. We've already done that. I'm not going to have you type it into the chat. We've already done that. I'm going to have you use the Annotate feature to show me which line is which. Now with Zoom, we kind of already went over how to do the Annotate, but if you're using Google Meets, your hack is the Jamboard. So remember how Ms. Gonzalez showed you the Jamboard earlier? This can be a great way to let the students annotate if you do not have the Zoom Annotate features. So we're going to go back to that Google Classroom, or you're probably still there, and let me pull it up. And what I'm going to do now is you're going to go to the Jamboard. So everybody click on the Jamboard. That should open up. Here it is. And what I did here is I took a screenshot of the image. And this can be any image, so you can directly import it or you can take a screenshot and upload it. So I could put that DNA image in there and I could have students, you know, circle where are the hydrogen bonds. Like we talked about before, I had a student kind of showing me where she was looking at. So any image that you want the students to annotate, stick it into a Jamboard and then you can have the students annotate all over it. So here's your pen feature. You can select the type of writing implement and the color. It's not unlimited, but it'll work. And I would like you using the Annotate feature to show for me
Ms.
which Line
It's
is
in view
which?
only, Miss
Yeah,
Goldberg.
it says view
It's
only.
set to view only? I thought I changed that to last night to edit. That's okay. I'll do it right now. Now, one thing you should know about Jamboard is it does have a 50-person max. I am hoping that none of your classes have more than 50 people. But if they do, it's a good thing to know. You might need 2 separate Jamboards, or you might need to use a different platform. Another thing you could use is that Nearpod. The Nearpod, as you saw, everybody can draw and annotate at the same time. So that gives you another hack if you cannot use the annotate feature through, say, something like Zoom. All right, looks like we're having fun there with our annotating. You could probably do this all day. I'm going to have to cut you off. All right, so there you go. So we've talked about so far using visuals, and with using visuals, using the chat, the public chat, the private chat, asking questions, layering your questions, and using different images to help guide that thinking to get the students to those conclusions. So these are all things you can do with your teacher. If your teacher gives you a lesson and says, here's the lesson, here's what you need to do, just keep these skills in mind so that way you can still get the students to come up to those conclusions by themselves. All right, so questions at this point. I'm going to pause before we move on to the next section. So any questions at the moment? All right, then we're going to keep going. So the next one that we're going to be talking about today is manipulatives. So a lot of times when we think about inquiry-based learning, we think about manipulatives. Let me hand the students something, they play around with it, they mess with it, and then they learn something, and I ask them questions, and it's great, and it's brilliant, and it's awesome. Oh boy, teaching online, right? What do? No manipulatives. Oh, too bad, so sad, right? Wrong. You can still make manipulatives. So I'm going to show you how you can literally take all your handheld manipulatives and turn them into digital manipulatives for your students. So the first one we're going to do here, it is one of my favorites. It is the card sort. So if you had step 1 with Mr. Sears, Mr. Elizondo, and myself, you probably did this activity at some point, which is the What is Life card sort, where we give you a bunch of cards and we have you put them into different categories of living, non-living, and undecided. Well, you can't hand them the cards, but you can make it into a digital card sort. So let me show you how this works. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to the Google Classroom and you are going to pull up the PowerPoint. This is very important. So let me show you what this looks like, because there's actually 2 of them. So you have, let me go back there. Okay. If you go to the classroom and you go to the What is Life card sort, there are 2 files. There's the PowerPoint and the Google Slide. Click the PowerPoint. We'll get into the Google Slide in a second. That's if you want to do something a little different. So you're going to click the PowerPoint. You're going to pull up the PowerPoint. And when you pull up the PowerPoint, what it's going to do is it's going to have the instructions, and then it's going to have something that looks a little like this. And you're going to have little manipulatives at the bottom that you can move around into the 3 categories. So just like if I was to physically hand you the cards, now they can do it on the PowerPoint on their own. So I'll give everybody a minute or 2 to open up the PowerPoint, move some of the cards around, and then I will ask somebody to share their screen.
Do you want us to download it into our computer or use Google Slides?
Do the PowerPoint that has to be downloaded. And there's a reason why I want you to do that one. And then we'll talk about the Google Slides next, because each one is important, but in a different way. So there's a reason why I included both.
I see the PowerPoint, I have it open, but I don't see the card.
It'll be on page 3, 2 or 3.
Yeah.
For me, it's a blank page as well, like the one that you're showing on your screen right now.
They're not there?
I don't think it really like downloaded because it opened up like super fast. And then it has the 3 slides, but
Yeah, they're there. I
Try
can
moving
access
the
them.
corn. Yeah, it's because you gotta the cards are on top of each other, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
they're on top of
you'll
each other.
see Under, yeah, so I see some people
Where it
already
says
moving it
corn
here.
right there.
Yeah, so you'll see like corn, and then underneath the corn, there's another one, fire, and so it should look like that. If you're struggling with it too much, don't worry about it. Again, this is just a training, but you know, we can talk about that later. So the first thing is, was somebody able to actually successfully open up the PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right, Jesus, share your screen.
Oh,
Share
okay.
your screen and show us the PowerPoint. What you've done so
Uh-huh.
far. Don't worry if you haven't finished. It's not a big deal.
Oh no, I barely started. just, just to let you know. Okay.
Okay,
And
so
then-
Jesus, can you tell us one of the things you put under non-living and why?
well, corn.
Okay, why corn?
I put it non-living because I felt that it doesn't move, it doesn't breathe, so non-living.
Okay, so Jesus put corn under non-living because it doesn't move and it doesn't breathe. Okay, so does anybody have an argument for corn being in the living category?
That it exchanges gas. So
It exchanges gas. So you like, is exchange of gas the same as breathe, or is that different in your mind?
I would think it's like
Sorry,
from a science perspective, I'd like to think gas exchange is like the same, because that's basically what we're doing. We're just a moving plant just with a brain.
And anything that is considered living, even if it was living at one point, is considered living, even though it's like cut and everything, it's still considered living.
Okay, so you're saying because the corn was cut, it's not on the stalk anymore, but it was on the stalk at one point and living while it was on the stalk, that you would say that should be living.
Yeah.
Porfirio, I noticed you wanted to answer a second ago. What was going to be your argument about the corn?
Well, it grows, so that's why it's a living thing. That's why I put that, because it grows.
Oh, because of the growth.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm hearing gas exchange. I'm hearing if it was living at one time, and I'm hearing growth. All right. But what about, say, a tornado? A tornado grows. Would that be considered living?
No.
Why
I have
not?
it as
Why would-
undecided.
Undecided. Okay.
Yeah.
So who's got an argument against tornado? They're like, no, that doesn't count.
It's just air. It's not a living organism. It's not an organism to begin with. It's a force of nature.
Okay, but would all of these things be natural?
Yes.
Okay, so we need a different thing maybe to do that. What about growth? Do we like the term growth, or do we have a different term that we may want to use instead of growth?
A different term?
Okay, different term. Does somebody have a different term instead of
I
growth?
guess like evolution of like stages.
Evolution, maybe we'd use evolution, maybe we'd use stages. Okay, so we could go on here for a while. It's a fun activity. But the thing that I want to stop and talk about here is, who is actually manipulating the cards right now?
The student.
The student. What would be the benefit of having the student manipulate the cards instead of me always manipulating the cards, or me always, showing my screen?
Because they're gonna give their opinion, right?
Absolutely, they're going to give their opinion. And who else can elaborate on that?
I think that as they're doing it, it kind of sticks more to them, like the whole living and non-living.
Right, they take a little bit more ownership. It's like, wait, this is my slide. I'm kind of like acting like the teacher a little bit. And so absolutely. So both Google Meets and Zoom allow the students to share the screen. So use that. So this is why I asked you to do the PowerPoint as a download, because one of the cool things with Google Classroom is that you can assign each student their own copy. If you were to assign one copy, let me show you what would happen here. So I'm going to steal my screen back, Denicio. You can actually, not Denicio, I think Jesus was doing it. You can actually, with Zoom has a new feature where you can actually toggle between screens. So you can have multiple students share their screen, and then you can pick which screen you want the class to see at any one point, which is really cool. Zoom also has another new feature where you can share multiple screens at the same time. So I could do that right now. So let's say I wanted you to see both my What is Life PowerPoint and if I wanted you to see my Google Classroom, I could have you do both at the same time. So the thing about it is if you are going to have them do one of these card sort activities, a couple of things to note. One is they are incredibly easy to make. This was just made with, I basically scanned the cards that we had and I took screenshots. So you can take screenshots, you can make your own pictures, you can make your own images, whatever you like. And then you basically stack them on top of each other and stick them on a PowerPoint or a Google slide, and the students can manipulate them around. You cannot do this with Nearpod. Nearpod's awesome. It's great. It has a lot of functionality, as you saw with Ms. Gonzalez. It cannot do a drag and drop. So if you want to drag and drop, PowerPoint or Google Slides is your friend. Anything that you make in PowerPoint, you can upload to Google Slide. Anything you make in Google Slide, you can save as a PowerPoint. So some of the things won't transfer beautifully, but enough does that you can use either. You don't have to worry about basically like, oh, I'm committed to PowerPoint or I'm committed to Google Slide. So the really cool thing about the Google Classroom is when you make an assignment, instead of you having to make one of these for every single student, you just select make a copy for every student and it will automatically copy your PowerPoint, your handout, your worksheet, or whatever. Now that is going to be really important because if you don't do that and you only make one copy, then you get, let me go back to it. Sorry, it's loading. You get this situation where everybody's using the same one. And so maybe like Lizbeth moves the yogurt over here and then Raymond moves the yogurt back. And then she's like, no, I want the yogurt over here. And he's like, no, I want the yogurt over there. So you don't want to give everybody the same PowerPoint or the same Google slide because then they're going to be fighting over it. With one exception. What's the exception? There's a hint. Look at my slides here. What do you notice? What did I put there?
You made multiple slides.
It's the same slide. I made copies, but what do we notice?
They're in groups.
Groups. How do I get my students to do group work online? Right? A big part of inquiry is having students work together and figure out things together in groups. Group work. So if you want students to do it in groups, then you have kind of a couple options. You can make one Google slide per group and you can assign it for each group of students, or you could do what I did here, where as a teacher, you just copy and paste the slide multiple times and you label it group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4. You can even have a table of contents page where you say, Lisbeth, Alma, Daniela, Raymond, you go to group 1, slide number 3. Vanessa, Jennifer, Samantha, Porfirio, you go to group 2, slide number 4. And it will direct them directly to where they need to go. So now I can have all my students working as a group on the same assignment. And you can even put them in breakout rooms, which we'll talk about later. They could all be talking to each other while they're working on this one assignment. Now, you can make one per group, or like I said, you as the teacher can just make one and copy and paste the slide a bunch of times. What would be the benefit for you as the teacher having it all in one presentation? What would be the benefit for you as the teacher having it all in one presentation?
You can have one presentation for class, and that way everything and all the work your students did is there, and then you can go back and look at it.
Okay, great. So you can have one copy per class so they can all look at it. And what else? What can I notice about group 1 and group 3 compared to group 2 and group 4?
You can
It helps you
monitor
make
what they're doing.
sure, yeah, it monitors if everyone's actually working or not.
Eagle eyes, eagle eyes. So it's one thing when you're walking around a classroom and you can see like, okay, group 1's good, group 2's and they need a little help. Group 3, oh boy, they haven't even started. This is kind of that. This is that for the virtual. So now, instead of having to pull up 4 different Google slides and checking everybody at the same time, it's all here. And I can just scroll through and I can say, oh man, group 1, they've got it. They're almost done. Ooh, group 2. Okay, I got to go visit group 2. They are really struggling. And so this gives you eagle eyes on all your class. So that can be the benefit of having it all in one document, is it's very easy for you to keep eagle eyes on the class. So again, here's group work. moved into the virtual space. Now, I'm going to show you this on steroids. Y'all ready? Here we go. It's pretty awesome. All right. This here is food webs. So who here has ever done the food web activity where we give you a bunch of cards and you make a food web? Didn't a lot of hands, a lot of hands. Okay, pretty classic lesson for middle school. All right, let me show you all of the different features that we can do right now. Oh, you know what? I'm going to stop sharing both screens because that's probably, I don't know what it looks like on your end, but it's probably confusing. So we're gonna just share this one screen. Is that better? Is it good? Okay, I'm seeing some head nods. All right, so a couple of things to walk you through. Write out your tasks. Write out your tasks just like you would want to in a normal space. Here's again where I did that. Anyone who's doing the forest food web will be on slide 3. Anyone doing the Antarctic food web will be on slide 4. Everyone doing the African grassland food web will be on slide 5, for example. Now, this activity actually has several tasks. My students might forget the tasks. So, one thing you can do is you can make task cards. And you can tell your class, okay, everyone do task number 1. When they are done with task number 1, they push it off to the side or delete it. And there is, it's making a liar out of me. Okay. I don't want to actually delete it because I need this like for later. There is task number 2. Behind that one, there is task number 3. So you can break up your activities and your students can have them on the slides and use them as they need them. Here, I have all of my card decks for each of the different food webs. And they can go and they can manipulate them. They can add arrows. They can draw. They can highlight. They can annotate. They can do things like that. But there's one more thing that I want to show you. Is maybe my students are looking at this picture and they have no idea what zooplankton is. Or they have no idea what zooplankton eats. Enter the alt text. So you enter alt text, which you should be doing anyways for any of your students who are visually impaired. And under the description, it says zooplankton feeds on phytoplankton. So any additional information you need to add to your students that would be on the back of a card, when you're doing one of these card sorts, you can enter it as an alt text. So now when they pull up the alt text, that's like looking at the back of the card. And now they have that additional information. So it doesn't take up a bunch of space on your card, but it's still there. All right. Then, when they are done, so you can sort of see what the finished product would look like with this. This might be one of my finished food webs. All right, so we got cards, they're annotating, we're having them use different colors so I can see which students put what. They're moving things around. But the other thing that is really cool about this is you can use this as a gallery walk. So in the past, if you had your students in a classroom, a physical classroom, you could have group A move to group B and check out their food web. You could have group B move to group C and check out their food web. Well, now you can do the same thing. All you have to do is just tell them which slide to visit. So forest food web people, go to the Antarctic food web, go to slide 4. Antarctic food web people, go to your African grasslands, go to slide 5. African grassland food web people, go to the forest food web, go to slide 6 or 3, whatever the case may be. And now you can see each other's work. So you can not only set this up to do group work and manipulatives, but you can also set this up where you can have students do things like a gallery walk, where they basically see each other's work and can annotate and augment each other's work as well.
What
All right,
type of questioning?
yes, go ahead.
Yeah, what types of questioning would we have the students like ask in that, or would that you would give them in that case? Like, would you say, what did you like about this group's diet food web? What would you change?
Oh, great question. Yeah, great question. What would you have them do, right? You can have them do anything that you want, but here's some examples. So what we would have them do is they start with 3 cards. So when you rotate to the next group, you add a card. And then you annotate what are, you know, words like autotroph and heterotroph and energy and producer. And so they could add that. And then you switch slides. And then it says, okay, now fix their slide. Anything that's wrong, fix it, plus add another card. And then when we get to the next one, it's, okay, now put an X on something. make it go extinct, revise the food web. So with each times they rotate, you could have new tasks, you could have new questions, you could have them fix things on the slide before. You have pretty wide latitude on what you do with that assignment. And basically anything you would have them do in person, you can move that to the virtual space.
Miss Goldberg, so they're in a group, but they're still working individually, or would they still be having that group discussion, or are they gonna have like a private group chat, or how would they discuss who they're gonna extinct as a group?
Excellent.
Yeah, that was my question too.
Right. The best way probably to do this would be through breakout rooms. So you would probably give the students through the Google Classroom or through a Zoom link or whatever platform your teacher is using, the link to the site, to the Google slide. And then you would, with the assignments, and then you would send them out into the breakout rooms. So while they're in the breakout rooms, they are doing all of this work. So they are doing all of this in a breakout room, and they are talking to each other and they are communicating. Then you would bring everybody back and you would say, okay, let's talk about what you did. Here's your next task. Everybody go either into, the same slide or go into a different slide. And now I'm going to send you back into the breakout rooms. Now you do task number 2. Okay, I'm going to bring everybody back. Let's check in. Let's talk about what's going on. Okay, now you're going to go back into your breakout rooms and do task number 3. So that's kind of how we did it for this food web activity. That's not the only way that you could do it, but probably breakout rooms would be the best way so they can physically talk to each other with everybody who's in the group. And the nice thing now is in the fall, Google Meets did not have breakout rooms, but lucky ducks, you spring people, they now do. So now Google Meet has the breakout room. So now your teacher, cooperating teacher, may not be comfortable with breakout rooms. If that's the case, that might be something that you can ask respectfully, can I try it and see how it goes? If they don't like how the breakout rooms are working, or your school has certain restrictions on breakout rooms because no teacher is there. That was one of the issues with the breakout rooms, why a lot of schools weren't using Zoom, is because no teacher would be at the breakout room at every point with the students. Then yes, you would have to come up with alternatives, like you can communicate with each other through some sort of chat feature, or this could be an assignment that they do on their own time, like on those asynchronous days. Why don't you all get together and you can meet together as a group and work on this group assignment. So those could be alternatives that you could do if your teacher is not allowing you to do breakout rooms with the class for whatever reason. But to make sure your breakout rooms are efficient as possible, I will go over one other thing at the end that will help with your breakout rooms. Other questions?
Ms. Goldberg, you mentioned that Wesco does Zoom, but the other districts do Google Meet. Can we suggest like using Zoom?
Probably not. Zoom is the leader of web conferencing. They have sort of the most features at this moment. Google Meets is trying to catch up, but they are playing catch up. Like I said, they don't have the annotate, they don't have the private chat unless you get an extension, which you can get extensions, but extensions are iffy. They're not always going to work every time. But they do have breakout rooms now, so yay. So usually the answer is no, because one, Zoom you have to pay for. So that could, that's one of the things. You can get 45 minutes for free, but I think that's it. They did remove the free educator access, I believe. So most of the schools have paid for a platform. They want you to use that platform. The other issue is, again, just, issues with getting the students and having the accounts and everything of that nature. They're pretty protective. They want to make sure that not anybody can get into the classroom for obvious reasons. So, if they have a Google account, they're going to make sure that only very specific people can go into that Google Classroom. Same thing with the Zoom. They're only going to make sure that very specific students can enter that Zoom room and nobody else. So my guess would probably be no. Even though, like I said, Zoom in some ways makes your life a lot easier. If they're using Google Meets, then you learn how to use Google Meets and you do an amazing job with Google Meets.
I think I heard you say that Google Classroom has breakout rooms too.
So what it is Google Meets is the conferencing software, and Google Classroom is like Blackboard. So the Google Classroom is going to house your assignments. It can grade things. So pretty much anything that your students would get, like as a handout or an assignment or a quiz or a test, most of them will be assigned now through Google Classroom. And so think of Google Classroom as kind of your Blackboard, and then Google Meets as like your Zoom. So this is how I meet with my students. And then thing about Google Classroom is it will have a link to your Google Meets. So they log into your classroom and then they click the little icon, and then it pulls up your Google Meet and you see your whole class. Other questions? These are good questions. I'm sure you have plenty coming in. Okay, one last thing I wanted to share with you in terms of manipulatives is also feel free to embed your manipulatives into your actual worksheets. So here's an example of a math lesson, tables and chairs. I have this chart where students are filling in how many tables and how many chairs. They're figuring out the patterns, they're writing equations, they're solving problems, but I also have the manipulatives right there. So by putting it into a PowerPoint or a Google slide, I basically took their handout and then I threw in these manipulatives of actual tables, not actual tables and chairs, they're squares and circles, but you get the idea. I threw in the manipulative into the actual presentation. You can also do this again with the Nearpod, but not for drag and drops. And so that way, when they're working on the homework assignment, the manipulative is right there. Or when they're working on the classwork assignment, the manipulative is right there. They don't have to toggle between screens. They basically have everything in one space, and then they can utilize the manipulative if they need in that space. One more thing that I'm going to suggest to especially my math folks, they have some stuff for science, but it's not as good as the math. There is a Facebook group called Teaching with Neons. Anyone use them? Teaching with Neons? Okay, they have created dozens, these are teachers from around the country who have created dozens of mostly math, a few science manipulatives, and they are going to share them with you for free. This is an amazing community. So I created a lot of these manipulatives myself, but you don't have to. They already exist. They're out there and they're awesome and they're fantastic, and people are willing to give them to you for free. So go check them out. Go check out some of these other sites. You do not have to make all these manipulatives. A lot of people have been teaching since last March, and have moved a lot of this stuff online for you, so you can utilize those resources. And then the final thing is, you are a community. You are all in the same boat. Many of you are teaching the same things. So if you come up with a really cool manipulative, please share. Please share with your fellow UTeach family, so that way they can use it too in their classes, either now or in the future. Because this stuff's cool, even when we go back in person. It's just cool stuff. So, feel free to utilize it now, later, and share, because you don't have to invent every single lesson. You do one cool one, somebody else does one cool one, you swap. That's what teaching is all about.
The people who share their manipulatives for free are the people that actually care for the students, right?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part. Who do what?
Yeah, if they're willing to share their manipulatives that took much effort, I believe, that means that they care for the students' learning.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, these are wonderful people who just love teaching, and they're like, hey, I came up with something cool, use it. Absolutely use it. A lot of these manipulatives you can also put into your virtual classroom, your Bitmoji classroom that Ms. Gonzalez is going to show you tomorrow. So at any point, if you need students to have like counters or die, because you're going to talk about like proportions or ratios or percentages or things like that, you can stick them into your virtual classroom. and then students can access them at any time, especially if it's a manipulative that you're going to use multiple times for multiple lessons. You can stick it in there and then they can use it whenever they need it. They can use it for homework assignments. So you have a lot of latitude with your manipulatives there. If you want any of the manipulative that I have created, that's fine. I'll share them with you. I'm happy to. We have these ones that you've seen, and I have a few more that I made for step 1 this semester. And if you want to make another manipulative and you need help, let me know, and I'm happy to help you. I know Mary, for CI, we made a pretty cool DNA one together. So, you know, if you ever need some help making manipulatives, reach out. Happy to do that with you. All right. Whew. Okay. We got through the big ones. We got through visuals. We got through manipulatives. We're going to whiz a little bit fast through demos and simulations. I'm going to show you one more hack with the breakout rooms, and then you are probably all ready to call it a day. Sort of. You do have to come back at 5:30 to meet with your master teachers, but we're going to get through it. Or sorry, not your master teachers, your cooperating teachers. Okay. So demos. Just like you would demo in person, you can demo online. Pretty easy to do. There's sort of 3 different ways that I would recommend you do it. One is you can share, just like you would share a pre-made video, something you found on YouTube in person, you can do that online as well. So here, for example, I am teaching a chemistry lesson and I want to teach about alkali metals. I am not going to take home alkali metals to my house of residence where I have small children and dogs and set things on fire. So I'm going to use a video. Okay, now I would recommend putting your video on mute. I would recommend putting all videos on mute so that way you can ask questions as the video is running. And then you can put it in there and ask the students to predict and notice what they're happening, just like you would do in a normal classroom. So here I put in the first alkali metal. What do we notice? What's happening?
They're changed.
It's changing.
A reaction.
There's a reaction. Okay, now we're moving on to the second one. Make your predictions. What's going to happen? I think it's going to happen.
Another reaction.
It's gonna change.
Another reaction. All right, let's see if you're right. Ooh, you are right. Another reaction. How would it compare to the first reaction?
More violent.
It's stronger.
It's definitely stronger. It's getting a little bit excited. I need your predictions for the final one. What's going to happen? Third alkali metal. What's going to happen here?
Reaction.
Probably going to be a bigger reaction.
Bigger reaction. Let's see if you're right.
Stronger.
Stronger reaction. One way to find out. Oh boy, look at that. Don't do that at home. Okay, yeah, that is a good reaction. So just like you would show a video in class, you can still show videos through Google Meets. You can show them through Zoom. They work beautifully. Now, this is a video that was made through YouTube. You can also create your own videos and do kind of like a flipped classroom. They watch the video, they come to class, and they discuss it, or they look at something, or they examine something. So that's definitely something you can do. Another thing that you can do with videos that's pretty cool is you can get free annotation software, and students can actually annotate on the video. This is really neat. So they could say with the first one, you could say, write your prediction, what happened? And they can literally write that on the video. And then they could do it for all 3. And then they could compare each other's answers or look at each other's answers and sort of have that class discussion. So this could be a really cool way to teach that. So if you are interested in that, I believe it is the University of Michigan. I can get you the link in a little bit, but it is called Ant Farm, like annotation, Ant Farm, cute. And so that's an example of a free annotation software, and I'll find it and put it into the chat in a little bit. But the other thing that you can do is you have this thing called the camera. So you can pin yourself, make yourself nice and big, or spotlight for everyone. And you can just grab things from around your house. Like here I have water. Exciting, yes. Only the best for my ATs. And then I can take out food coloring. And I can ask my students questions like, what is happening? What is happening with my food coloring in my water? So let's go with Mario. Mario, what's happening?
It's changing the color of the water, so it's going to red.
Okay, just part of the water, all of the water? Which part's changing?
Looks like just the bottom.
Just the bottom, okay. Let's see, let's give it a second more. Kristen, what do you think?
I think it's sort of like distributing itself more into the water, so it's getting a little more red.
Okay, so the water's getting a little bit more red over time. Now, if I were to heat up the water, do you think it would make a difference? Noemi, what do you think? Do you think it would make a difference if I heated up the water?
Yeah, I think it would.
Okay, how so?
Because now the water's gonna be hot, so I think it's gonna diffuse more, like it's gonna be more red, I think.
Okay, so maybe it'd be more red if I heated it up. What about the opposite? What if I cooled it down? Daniela, what do you think would happen if I cooled it down?
I would say there wouldn't really be a change. Maybe kind of stay almost the same like that. Since it's almost
Okay. Well, here's the cool thing. I have ice cubes and I have a microwave. So I can actually do this for my students. This other cool thing is they can do this too. So you can have them do some kitchen chemistry at home. You can have them go around your house and find a triangle. Everyone find a triangle. All right, now let's compare each other's triangles. What do we notice about each other's triangles? Do they all have the same sides? Do they all have the same angles? So you can just have them grab stuff at home and do some pretty cool math and science. One of the coolest lessons that we had this year was for CI was a physics lesson where literally they just took a bunch of boxes and pushed them, took a bunch of little balls and threw them in cups. And then they learned all about vectors. They learned all about forces. It was all easy stuff that they had in their house. One student did have a compound bow and used that to show projectile motion. So you don't have to do that, but if you have one, very cool. Just saying the bar has been set, Christian. So you might need to have a compound bow in your next lesson. Just saying. All right, so feel free to grab stuff around the house. Feel free to have them grab stuff around the house and use that for your demo purposes as well. Even though I said you can't do sink and float online, you totally can. That was a lie. You can have them grab objects from their house, stick them in water, see which ones sink and which ones float, and have a cool conversation about density. So all of this is very doable. The last one I want to share with you is simulations. So simulations are kind of perfect for virtual learning because they were actually designed for virtual learning from the get-go. That is really their home. Everything else we're adapting. This does not need to be adapted. So any sort of simulation will work well in the virtual environment because that's what it's supposed to do. Now, I'm not going to share with you all simulations because there's way too many, but I am going to share with you 3 of my favorites. So one of them, if you have not checked it out yet, is Desmos Graphing Calculator. It is pretty awesome. Show of hands, who's used Desmos? So cool, right? Like the best. Okay, so if you haven't yet, they actually have teacher activities. You can check them out, or you can just go straight into the calculator. And that is actually where I got that image of the 3 lines was from Desmos. So you can type in equations. They also have, you can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can manipulate them, but they also have some pre-made expressions. Where's the expression? Oh no, here it is. Some pre-made ones that have sliders. So if you want your students to, for example, learn about the linear equation y equals mx plus b and figure out, hey, what is that m? What is that m? What does it do? They can manipulate the slider and say, oh, wait, what's changing? What's staying the same? What is that b? What does the b do? How do I get it below the 0? How do I get it above the 0? And so this could be a great way to do some inquiry-based learning in mathematics with your students. So check out Desmos, it's pretty awesome. For my science crowd, I'm going to recommend HHMI Biointeractives. These are amazing. One of my favorite is the Virus Explorer because, you know, people are sort of into viruses right now. Can't imagine why. So with that one, let me see, I think I have to show you a new screen. Can we see it now? No, I don't think so. Are we seeing the Virus Explorer? No, there it is. Okay, so they can go in and they just added coronavirus this year.
Oh,
is it not showing again?
Yeah,
One
we
second.
can see just the Zoom screen.
How about now?
Yes, we can see it now.
Yeah.
Okay, so they could look inside at the outside of a coronavirus, they could look at the inside of a coronavirus, they can look at the replication cycle, And they can also look at different viruses and compare it to different viruses. So how is coronavirus similar to the flu? How is it different? Who are the hosts? You know, it lets you divide up by those things. So which ones have human hosts? Which ones have mammalian hosts? Which ones have plant hosts? And you can have them compare and look at the different ones. Which ones have vaccines? Ooh, let's see if the vaccine is available on coronavirus. Did they update it? Oh, they haven't updated it yet. Keep an eye on that. It'll be fun. Okay, so if you are one of my bio people, this is a cool one, but there's many others under the HHMI that you should check out and see if you'd like to explore those. Finally, oldie but a goodie, PhET. PhET's great, right? PhET's got simulations for every subject: physics, chemistry, math, biology, and for my middle school people, you've got some earth science in there as well. Also, a lot of the simulations have lesson plans. Again, teachers have already taught this. They've already created a lesson plan. They've already created handouts. They've done a lot of the work for you. So you can select one, and then you can actually check and see what lesson plans are already available. Let's see, for teachers. And boom, here are all the people around the world who are like, I've used this PhET simulation and I created a lesson plan. I've even aligned it to the standards. I've come up with handouts, worksheets, all the shebang. So check out PhET. PhET's a great one too. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure, because last time I did this, I apparently was just talking to myself for a while and nobody could see what was on the screen. Okay, so if that happens, just correct me. All right, so those are 3 simulations that I would highly recommend, but like I said, there's a million other out there that are really great. So check those out. For Christian, for physics, if you haven't checked it out yet, Physics Classroom. Physics Classroom. You got some
Yes,
great.
I love that one.
The good stuff. All right, we are in the home stretch. So what we're going to do now, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So we're just going to recap some of the things we talked about so far. We talked about the public and the private chat. Use the chat first, let everybody get a chance to get their ideas out, and then follow up with that verbal response. Screen share. You can share your screen, students can share their screen. Pretty cool. Unmute your students. Let them talk. Let them have conversations with you. Let them have conversations with each other. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about breakout rooms. So let's see, how much time do we have left? 15 minutes? Okay, enough time for breakout rooms. So here is my advice for breakout rooms. So again, you can do breakout rooms with Google Meets. You can do it with Zoom. I'm going to stick you in breakout rooms in just a second. But here is the problem with breakout rooms, as you've probably experienced in some of your classes before. So actually, I'm going to pose that as a question. What do you think is the problem with breakout rooms? Everybody go to the chat. What might be the problem with sending your students off to a breakout room to work as a group? Okay, so I'm seeing no supervisor. It can be awkward, off task. They may not work. Absolutely. So let's see. Who have I not called on yet? Eric, have I called on you? Well, it doesn't matter. Eric, what might be the problem with sending your students off to the breakout rooms?
One problem might be that you're not with them, so you can't see what they're doing.
Exactly. Can't see what they're doing. And you've probably been in several breakout rooms where basically the students have their cameras off, their mics off, nobody talks, nobody does anything. And it's kind of like, well, this was successful. Okay. So my advice for the breakout rooms is first assign tasks. Assign tasks for your students. Here are 3 basic tasks. You can assign more or less, but you should probably have these 3. Reporter, recorder, and timekeeper. Let's go through those 3. Okay, what might be the job of the reporter? Let me give this one to Brenda. Brenda, what might be the job of the reporter?
Brenda Santana or Brenda Rios?
Oh, I'm sorry, Brenda Rios.
I would say just to write down what's going on, like what are we talking about, so that way we know what we covered.
Okay, good, except that's the recorder. So you got the recorder. Perfect. Yes, they're going to record what people talked about. We'll talk about how they should do that in just a second. So reporter, James, what might be the job of the reporter? If the recorder is recording, what is the reporter doing?
they're writing down the notes for the group
Still the recorder.
recorder?
Yeah. So reporter.
Oh, reporter. So that they're in charge of saying like representing their group and telling.
Yes, exactly. So when you bring everybody back and you're like, so what did you guys talk about? And they're all like quiet because nobody wants to say. You already assigned somebody. So you can say, reporter from group 1, please tell us what your group discussed. So you would probably want to have a reporter, somebody who's going to let talk about what the group did when everyone comes back together. You definitely want a recorder, like Brenda said, recording what the students are doing. And then finally, timekeeper. Valeria, what is the purpose of the timekeeper?
So basically with the timekeeper is you're like on top of the task, like not only talking about the same thing, but moving on or along whatever, the teacher asks.
Exactly. So you're making sure that they're using that time efficiently and that they know when it's time to sort of wrap everything up. So you can, again, have more tasks than those, but I would say definitely have those 3. Those 3 are going to be really important. Now, one other thing that you're going to really want is you need a wiki. You need eyes on the skies. A lot of you point, one of the big problems with sending kids to the breakout rooms is you have no idea what they're doing. So you have no ideas which groups need your help and which groups don't. So you need some sort of wiki. So in this case, my wiki is a Google Doc, and I will show you what that looks like. So if you were to go to your Google Classroom, you can select Breakout Rooms. Everyone select the Google Doc. And what I have here is I have my breakout rooms numbered. You can also name them. And you can put the members. And I actually have this as a linkable document, so I can actually go off to the side and it will take me immediately to whichever group I select. So here it will take me to group 8, group 9, group 5, whatever the case may be. And then what their instructions are. What are they supposed to be doing? And a place for them to write their answers. So I want one living document where I can check every single group at once. And I can see, okay, group 1, they're on task, they're doing it, they're good. Group 2 hasn't written anything. I probably should visit group 2. Maybe they're not writing anything because they're not working, or maybe they just forgot to write stuff down. Let me go check in on them. Group 3, they're doing okay, but they're getting some stuff wrong. Let me go check in on group 3. So that way you've got eyes on the sky. That way you have some place where you are not flying blind and you have no idea which group to go visit. Now, this in this case is just like a simple table, but we talked about how you could do that with a Google slide. And you could check each slide and see what the students are doing there. Really up to you how you set this up, but you need to have some sort of document where you got eyes on the sky and you can check everybody at once and see who needs your help and who doesn't. So I'm going to actually do that right now. I am going to set you up into breakout rooms. And when you go into your breakout rooms, you are going to discuss the following 2 things. Well, first of all, you're going to select a reporter, recorder, and timekeeper. And then you are going to discuss what virtual meeting platform you will be using and how can you integrate inquiry into your class. Okay. Let's see. I think I'll just probably use your same breakout rooms as before. So make sure you have the wiki open. Whoever's your reporter, be recording everything down. You're only going to have 5 minutes because we're almost out of time. And I just need to place Brenda Rios because she's by herself. Brenda, you're math, right?
Yes.
Oh, actually, you know what? I think a lot of people aren't. I'm just going to recreate the rooms. Okay. There we go. All right, so you will get your breakout rooms with 3 to 4 people each. When you get the invitation, please go work on this Google Doc, and then I'll bring you back in 5 minutes. All right. Okay, so welcome back. I'm just gonna share what the Google Doc looked like while we're waiting for everyone to come back. So you can just sort of see as a teacher what you could be seeing while you're having your students working in the breakout rooms. Thank you, sweetheart. I'll be done in like 5 minutes. Okay, honey? Thank welcome back, everybody. As you can see, this is what the Google Doc would look like as the students are recording and annotating. And based off of that, I can select which rooms I need to go attend to. So definitely having a living document like this can be helpful. And it looks like we had actually a good mix in most of the rooms. So different strategies we can use. So the last thing is I just kind of want to recap everything that we talked about. This is by no means an exhaustive list of the technology and resources you can use to embed inquiry into your lessons, but that's not the point. The point is to answer that question we asked at the very beginning of class: can you teach inquiry remotely? So everyone unmute your microphones, and at the same time, what are we going to say?
Yes.
Yes.
That was the correct answer. Good job. All right, the answer is yes. You can absolutely embed inquiry using the technology, using the resources that your teachers already have. It's just using those simple little tips and tricks that we've taught you throughout the courses to get them to come up with those ideas and those conclusions by themselves, and by themselves is a relative term, with your assistance and your aid and your visuals and your questioning and your manipulatives. So that being said, let us help you. Let us, as the cooperating teachers, let the master teachers, let your peers help you. This is going to be a fun but challenging semester, and you do not have to do it by yourself. So work together, work as a team, and let's create some really cool lessons together, and let's share those lessons that we can use now and we can use in the future.